Welcome, everyone. Before we start, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop a comment below. Also, tell me what kind of stories you'd love to hear. Stay tuned till the end. Story 1. I pulled into the Purdue plant late at night, exhaustion settling deep in my bones. After dropping my empty trailer, I parked near a small pond, one of the few designated spots for bobtails. The night air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something I could not quite place. My pickup was not scheduled for another 12 hours, so I went through my routine, checked my locks, did my pre-trip inspection, and climbed into the bunk. The distant hum of the plant's machinery blended with the occasional croak of a bullfrog. Peaceful, or so I thought. A sharp tapping against my passenger side door jolted me awake. My pulse spiked. I sat up fast, peering through the window, expecting another driver, maybe someone looking for a lumber check. But the lot was empty, just the reflection of my own wary eyes staring back at me. I let out a breath, shaking my head. Maybe the wind knocked something loose. Maybe I had imagined it. I lay back down, pulling the blanket up to my shoulders, willing myself to relax. Then it came again, this time on the driver's side, a precise, rhythmic tapping. My breath hitched. I bolted upright and scanned the area outside my window. Still nothing, just darkness stretching out under the dull glow of the lot lights. My fingers tightened around the blanket. I double-checked my door locks and cracked open the side hatches so I could hear better. Minutes passed. Silence. Then a soft, wet sound. Splat. 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 Something moving along the side of my truck. My stomach coiled. I sat up slowly, gripping the edge of the bunk. The sound was deliberate, almost playful. I positioned myself, ready to catch a glimpse of whatever it was just as it reached my window. Thud, a heavy impact on the roof. I froze. For a long moment, I listened, straining to hear past the thudding heartbeat in my ears. My fingers wrapped around the tire thumper hanging by my seat. Whatever was up there, it was moving. Then something dropped onto my hood with a lifeless thud. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I leaned forward, barely daring to look. A shape, hunched, unmoving, and then it stood up. A goose. Its head swayed, beady eyes locking onto mine. My muscles unclenched, but just as I exhaled, the tapping at my door resumed, rapid, erratic. I yanked the handle and threw open the driver's side door, tire thumper raised. Another goose, this one flailing its wings, honking wildly as it waddled away into the night. I sat there stunned as the realization set in. The pond, the damn pond. I had parked next to a nesting ground, and the geese, they were just playing their own kind of game. But sleep never came after that, because no matter how much I told myself, it was just birds. Every few minutes, the tapping returned, soft, insistent, like something still waiting to be let in. Story 2. I was hauling a load from Tucson, Arizona, up to Salt Lake City, Utah. The route was supposed to be straightforward, but a flash flood had wiped out part of the main highway. That meant a detour, one that took me deep into the winding, isolated mountain roads of southern Utah. It was late, too late. My eyes were heavy, my body aching from the long drive. There were no towns for miles, no gas stations, no signs of life, just dark roads and the vast emptiness of the mountains. I found a wide shoulder and decided to pull over for the night. I locked my doors, cut the engine, and settled into the bunk. Darkness swallowed everything outside. No streetlights, no headlights in the distance. Just silence, until it wasn't. A noise, a soft rustling near the back of my truck. I stirred, my mind sluggish with sleep. Then, a distinct metallic clatter, the sound of something tugging at my air and power cables. I froze. The cables were only inches from where my head rested, just on the other side of the cab wall. My pulse quickened. Maybe an animal, a mountain lion, a bear. I stayed still, listening, hoping whatever it was would lose interest and leave. Then the truck shook. Something heavy climbed onto the back of my rig. The suspension creaked. My mind raced, calculating weight. 200 pounds? 3? Every nerve in my body screamed to move, to act. I balled my fist and slammed it against the cab wall, hard. The sound exploded in the silence like a gunshot. A scream tore through the night. Not an animal. A man, a dull thud followed as he hit the ground. Then chaos. Shouts erupted all around me. Voices, multiple voices, 15, maybe more. My blood turned ice as I scrambled into the driver's seat, fumbling for the ignition. I flicked on the headlights, and there they were. A squad of soldiers dressed in full gear scattered around my truck. Their faces were wide with shock. One of them raised a hand, signaling me to wait. Stand down. Stand down. Turns out, they were Army reserves, conducting a midnight ruck march and capture drill. Their objective, secure an abandoned truck. except their target was 3 miles down the road. I was just a coincidence. Once I explained I was an actual trucker and not part of their exercise, they called their commanding officer, who confirmed they had the wrong truck. We shared a few laughs, but I did not sleep after that. Not because of them, but because for those few moments before I turned on the lights, I had no idea what was outside my truck. And in the middle of nowhere, sometimes, that is the worst part. Story 3. I used to drive road trains through the Gascoyne region of outback Western Australia. Long, endless stretches of empty road, just me and the hum of the engine beneath a sky so dark it swallowed the world whole. Night shifts were the worst. Fatigue did strange things to the mind. Shadows twisted in the periphery. Shapes flickered in the headlights. Things that were not really there. A pack of goats could morph into something monstrous, their forms stretching, shifting. I learned to ignore it. Until the night, I couldn't. I had been on the road for hours. Exhaustion seeping into my bones, I pulled over to rest, letting the engine run cold. Before shutting everything down, the silence was suffocating, pressing against the truck like a living thing. Then I heard it. Not voices, not animals, just noise, rhythmic, deliberate, like something communicating in a language I could not understand. And then the truck shook, not a small tremor, a deep, violent lurch that rattled the entire cab. I shot upright, heart hammering. My breath came out in short, sharp gasps. I reached for the mirror, my fingers numb with fear. Shadows, moving, surrounding the truck. I strained my eyes, trying to make sense of them. Dark figures, shifting against the night. Their movements were too fluid, too synchronized. I held my breath, listening. The noise came again, low, guttural murmurs, blending with the wind. I wanted to believe it was the wind. Then something scraped against the cab, a slow, deliberate drag of something sharp against metal. My body tensed. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white. Another scrape. Closer this time. I flicked the ignition, slammed my foot on the gas, and turned on every light I had. The high beams cut through the night, but there was nothing there. Just dust and darkness. But I did not wait. The truck roared to life, tires spitting gravel as I tore down the road, hands locked on the wheel. My breath was uneven, my pulse hammering. I kept glancing at my mirrors, expecting to see something following. Nothing. Just the open road stretching endlessly ahead. I told myself it was the wind, that it was just goats brushing against the truck, my exhausted mind playing tricks on me. But that cab was heavy. It would have taken more than wind to shake it like that. And the way those shadows moved, I still see them sometimes. In my dreams, I never stopped to sleep on a night shift again. Story 4. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains and Minnesota area. Long stretches of highway. Nothing but the hum of the engine and the glow of the dashboard to keep me company. One night, around 2 a.m., I was pushing through North Dakota, trying to reach Montana by morning. I had a valuable tractor part in the back. A farm needed it at sunrise, and I had no time to waste. The road ahead stretched endlessly, flat, empty. North Dakota's kind of empty is different. It is not just a lack of people. It is a void. A black sheet draped over miles of nothing. That was when I saw it. A dark shape in my lane. Long, motionless, half a mile ahead, but something about it made my skin crawl. I eased off the gas, shifting to the opposite lane. Looked like road debris, maybe tire retread. But as I got closer, my stomach clenched. 2 people, lying head to toe, spanning the entire width of my lane. I swerved hard, tires screaming as I barely missed them. My rig slowed to a near stop, my breath ragged, hands gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles ached. They did not move, not an inch. I hovered over the brake, debating whether to back up and check on them. But then, a memory. An old trucker I once worked with, a graybeard who had been driving longer than I had been alive, told me something once, a warning. Out in the remote places, he had said, some folks play dead in the road. You stop, you get out, and that's when they come from the bushes. Take your truck, take your money, leave you for dead. A chill ran through me. I put my truck back into gear. That was when they moved, both of them, at the exact same time, sitting up like marionettes. Their heads snapped toward me, their bodies stiff, unnatural. I did not wait to see what came next. My foot slammed the pedal, the truck roaring forward. As I passed, I saw them scramble to their feet and rush toward the shoulder, not stumbling, not dazed, moving with purpose. I grabbed my radio and called it in, told the highway patrol what I had seen, but out there, that deep into nothing, I doubted anyone would get there in time. I do not know who they were or what they wanted, but thanks to that old graybeard story, I never stopped to find out. Story 5. I parked off an exit ramp around 3 a.m., settling in for my 10-hour break. The moon hung high, casting a pale glow over the landscape. A cut cornfield stretched beside me, empty, silent, or so I thought. A shape stood in the field, unmistakably human. A chill prickled up my arms. Maybe an old farmer had left a scarecrow out for the grandkids. That had to be it. Shaking it off, I pulled out my phone, scrolling through some YouTube videos to wind down, but something in my peripheral vision caught my attention. Movement. I turned my head sharply. The figure was still there, but something felt off. Was it closer? No, it had to be my imagination. The highway was empty, except for the occasional car that sped past every 10 minutes or so. Isolated, quiet. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I needed to take a leak. For a moment, I debated using a bottle, but no, I was not a kid. I was letting paranoia get the best of me. I stepped out, the night air crisp against my skin. Walking between my truck and trailer, I cast another glance toward the figure, still there, right where it had been. I exhaled, shaking my head at myself, and focused on the task at hand. But an unease crawled up my spine. Something was wrong. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to look. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I turned my head. The field was empty. The figure was gone. A jolt of terror shot through me. My breath hitched. My pulse pounded in my ears. I barely had time to react before instinct took over. I rushed back into my truck, hands fumbling to start the engine. I did not care about violations. I did not care about anything but getting out of there. The truck roared to life, tires kicking up dust as I tore down the highway. I did not look back. 40 minutes later, I pulled into a brightly lit, crowded Love's truck stop. The sight of people, of noise, of movement was the only thing that made me feel safe again. I have never stopped on an exit ramp since. Story 6. I used to do deliveries. Not a trucker, but I spent plenty of time on the road, driving through some of the loneliest places imaginable. One of my regular routes took me deep into the boondocks, 25 miles from civilization, wedged between two distant towns. I only drove that route once a month, but I could always count on seeing at least one car, a sign that even out there, I wasn't completely alone. The road itself was desolate. Old, broken-down houses sat scattered along the stretch, forgotten by time. I had never seen a soul around them. No lights, no movement, just rotting wood and sagging porches. They didn't look livable. That was why I froze when I saw her. It was late afternoon, the sun hanging low in the autumn sky. I had been driving for miles without passing another vehicle when I reached those old houses. And for the first time, someone was there. An old woman. She stood in her yard, pushing an old-fashioned manual grass cutter. Her frail arms worked the rusted blades through brittle, overgrown grass. But as I approached, she stopped. Her head snapped up. I eased off the gas. thinking maybe she was trying to get my attention. Maybe I had been speeding, but she didn't wave. She didn't move. She just stared. Something about the way she held herself made my stomach tighten. Her arms hung limp at her sides, the grass cutter forgotten. As I passed, I stole one last glance in the rearview mirror. She had turned a full 180 degrees, still staring. A cold unease crept up my spine. My fingers gripped the wheel tighter. The road stretched out ahead, endless and empty, but my mind stayed behind with her. I never saw her again. Never saw anyone near those houses in the 10 months I drove that route, and I never stopped. Not once. Story 7. My father was a truck driver in East Africa back in the 80s and early 90s. Roads stretched endlessly through the heat, dust, and uncertainty of a country on the brink of chaos. He had seen his share of danger, but nothing like what happened in Rwanda. He was passing through the country, hauling cargo, when he reached a checkpoint. Armed men waved him down. He had been stopped before, countless times, for bribes, inspections, nothing unusual. But this time, something was different. Before he could react, rifles were pointed at him. Rough hands yanked him from the cab, dragging him toward a rusted cage near the road. More than a dozen men were crammed inside, their faces etched with terror. He tried to speak, to explain, but the soldiers did not understand or did not care. That was when he realized why he was there. They thought he was Tutsi, and here that meant death. Every night they came, pulling 5 men from the cage, and they never came back. He had seen things on the road: bandits, wild animals, angry mobs, but nothing prepared him for the sound of machetes in the dark, the quiet after, the waiting. 3 nights passed, 3 nights of silent terror, of trying to make eye contact, to beg, to plead without words. But no one spoke his language. No one knew he was not Rwandan. Then, on the 4th night, a man shuffled closer. He spoke a little Swahili, just enough to understand. My father showed him his ID, desperation in his eyes. The man nodded, disappearing into the mass of bodies pressing against the cage. Minutes passed, then an hour, then the cage door swung open. A soldier barked orders. My father was shoved forward. Keys dropped into his hands. He did not wait, did not question it. He climbed into his truck, hands shaking, heart pounding, and drove. He never looked back. Story 8. I was driving through rural New Mexico, deep in the Bisty Badlands. Nothing but strange, melted rock formations stretching for miles. No trees, no signs of life, just sand, stone, and silence. Then the storm hit. Rain hammered the windshield, so heavy I could barely see 20 feet ahead. The wipers fought against it, but it was useless. Lightning split the sky, illuminating jagged rock formations like something out of a nightmare. Thunder rolled through the empty landscape, shaking the ground beneath my tires. Hail followed, slamming against the hood like a million tiny fists. I slowed to a crawl, barely pushing 20 miles an hour. The road twisted ahead, disappearing into sheets of water. Then I rounded a bend, and the world was on fire. Flames raged across the desert, licking 20 feet into the air. Hundreds of yards in every direction, the barren landscape burned. Fire roared, even as the rain kept pouring. My breath caught in my throat. This was impossible. Rocks, dirt, none of it should be burning. Not in this downpour. I kept driving, slowly, watching, waiting, half expecting something, someone, to step out of the inferno. The flames danced unnaturally, twisting in the storm like they had a mind of their own. It felt wrong, unreal. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had lost my mind, if this was some kind of fever dream, or if I had fallen asleep at the wheel and drifted into another reality. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was gone. The fire vanished behind me, swallowed by the storm. I checked the news later. A propane truck had lost control, slid off the road. The tank ruptured on impact, igniting everything around it. That explained the fire. But I never saw the truck. Maybe it was behind a ridge. Maybe the storm had hidden it. Or maybe it was something else entirely. I did not stop to find out. Story 9. My father was a truck driver, running freight between Edinburgh and London. Long, dark stretches of motorway. Hours of isolation. Just him and the road. One night, something happened. Something he could never explain. He was cruising along, headlights cutting through the darkness, when movement caught his eye. A car had pulled up alongside him. In the passenger seat, a woman. Her hair was pulled into a tight, severe bun. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She was staring at him, mouth moving, silent, pleading. Before he could react, the car veered off at the next exit, disappearing into the night. He gripped the wheel tighter. His pulse quickened, but he told himself it was nothing. A trick of the light, a misunderstanding. Then, half an hour later, a different car, different driver, same woman, Same haunted eyes, same desperate stare. His stomach turned to ice. He wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, some strange mistake. But deep down, he knew better. He decided to stop at the next service station, call the police, just in case. But before he could catch the plate, the car vanished into the night. 4 hours passed. The city lights of London glowed on the horizon. Then another car, same woman. Her mouth was open now, screaming, hands slamming against the glass, eyes wide, wild, desperate. That was it. He swerved into a lay-by, fumbling for his phone, called the police. His voice shook as he explained what he had seen. Silence on the other end. Then, we've had 3 other calls about the same woman, same description, same location. But that was all he ever heard. She never appeared on the news. No missing persons reports. No follow-up from the police. Nothing. Just a nameless woman, lost somewhere between the motorways, trapped in different cars, screaming for help. And no one ever knew why. Story 10. It was around 2006. I was hauling construction material through rural Tennessee, somewhere between Memphis and Nashville, a 2-lane road, nothing but endless woods stretching in every direction. The tarp on my load wasn't secured properly. I spotted a wide shoulder, pulled over, and climbed onto the trailer to redo it. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees. That was when I noticed him. A man walking toward me on the same side of the road. He looked out of place. His hair, if you could call it that, was a patchy, uneven mullet, like he had taken a good dull knife to it. His clothes were filthy, his white sneakers missing laces, tongues flopping as he walked, but it was his eyes that set me on edge. They weren't bloodshot, not unfocused, just off. I kept working, but grabbed my winch bar, setting it within reach. 8 pounds of solid metal, just in case. He stopped beside me, stared. "I've got a long walk," he said. I nodded. "Yeah, man. You do?" He lingered, waiting. I made it clear I wasn't offering a ride. Insurance, company rules. Sorry. He nodded, turned, and walked past my truck. I exhaled, went back to strapping the tarp down, kept an eye on him as he moved away. Then he stopped, turned, came back. "I've got a long walk," he said again. Same words, same tone. Like he hadn't spoken them before, I repeated my apology. He hesitated, then turned again, disappearing down the road. Relief settled in. I hurried to finish, but I kept looking over my shoulder. He was getting smaller in the distance until he wasn't, until he turned around. He was walking back toward me, now about 100 yards away. His hand was up to his face like he was on the phone, the other gesturing wildly, except he wasn't holding a phone. He was talking to his hand, and he was angry. I climbed into the truck, locked the doors, winch bar on the seat beside me. He was close now, close enough for me to see, his mouth moving. I fired up the engine, shoved the truck into gear. As I pulled out, I glanced at him one last time, his hand still pressed to his face, lips moving, eyes dead. Then something changed. His mouth stretched wide, his expression twisting, his eyes dark, hollow, locked onto mine. And for a second, I swear I heard something. Not his voice, but a whisper inside the cab. The engine roared as I punched the gas, tearing down the road. My hands were shaking. I kept glancing at the mirrors, expecting to see him chasing after me. But he was gone. The road behind me was empty, except as I drove, a feeling crept over me, like something was still with me, riding in the cab, watching. I didn't stop again that night, didn't dare look into the empty seat beside me.